Welcome back to my channel where I explore tips and strategies to help you speak English effortlessly and excel in your IELTS speaking test. Today I have a challenging topic for you, the significance of phrasal verbs. Phrasal verbs are an essential part of the English language and make a huge difference in your IELTS speaking performance. So let's dive in. Hey everyone, it's Miriam, an IELTS expert and the founder of IELTS Adventure. In today's video, we're going to talk about the significance of phrasal verbs in everyday speaking and the IELTS speaking test. Phrasal verbs are a combination of a verb and one or two particles, which can be adverbs or prepositions, that together form a new meaning. They are commonly used in English and play a significant role in everyday conversations and in formal writing. There are two types of phrasal verbs, separable and inseparable. In separable phrasal verbs, the verb and the particle can be separated by an object. For example, she put on her shoes. The object shoes is placed between the verb put and the particle on. However, in inseparable phrasal verbs, the verb and the particle cannot be separated by an object. They always stay together. For example, he's looking after his little sister. The particle after is not separated from the verb look. There are some phrasal verbs that have two particles. Phrasal verbs with two particles are also inseparable. Let's take a look at some examples. Who came up with that idea means who thought of that idea or that plan. Or let's get rid of these old boxes. It means those boxes are unwanted and you want to remove them or become free of the things that you don't want. Or I can't put up with the noise anymore. It means I cannot tolerate the noise. Or I'm looking forward to seeing you means I'm excited and happy about seeing you soon. Understanding whether a phrasal verb is separable or inseparable is essential for correct usage and comprehension of English sentences. To determine if a phrasal verb is separable or inseparable, you can always look them up in a reliable dictionary or look for example sentences. I know from experience that learning phrasal verbs is challenging. Having taught English for over 20 years, I can firmly say that students unanimously believe that phrasal verbs are confusing, and I cannot agree with them more. Let's take a look at what some of my students think of phrasal verbs. Why are phrasal verbs confusing? Reason number one, multiple meanings. Phrasal verbs often have multiple meanings depends on the context. For example, turn off can mean to switch off a device, but it can also mean to cause someone to lose interest. This variety of meanings can make it challenging to grasp their exact usage. Reason number two, idiomatic expressions. Phrasal verbs are often idiomatic, which means that their meaning cannot be inferred by understanding their individual words. For example, put up with means to tolerate or endure, but it may not be apparent from the words put or up. This idiomatic nature can confuse learners who rely on literal translations. Reason number three, particle placement. The position of the particle, preposition, or adverb in a phrasal verb can change the meaning or the grammatical structure. Some phrasal verbs allow the particle to be placed both before and after the object, while others require it to be placed in specific positions. This flexibility in particle placement can be overwhelming and leads to confusion. Reason number four, variations across English varieties. Phrasal verbs can vary across different English-speaking regions. Different phrasal verbs may be used in British English, American English, or other varieties. This variability adds another layer of complexity for learners trying to master phrasal verbs. Now let's see why using phrasal verbs is important in the IELTS speaking test and how you can get a higher band score by using phrasal verbs correctly. Using phrasal verb will impact two criteria of lexical resource and fluency and coherence. The IELTS speaking test assesses a candidate's range and accuracy of vocabulary. Using phrasal verbs effectively showcases a broader vocabulary and demonstrates a deeper understanding of idiomatic expressions. Incorporating phrasal verbs in your responses can elevate your score in the lexical resource criteria. Using phrasal verbs correctly can also impact the fluency and coherence criteria. Fluency and coherence are crucial aspects evaluated in the IELTS speaking test. Using phrasal verbs naturally and appropriately can enhance the flow of your speech and contribute to the coherence of your responses. It shows that you are comfortable using more complex language structures, which positively impacts your fluency score. Phrasal verbs are an integral part of everyday English conversation. The IELTS speaking test aims to assess your ability to communicate effectively in real life situations. Incorporating phrasal verbs in your speech reflects a more authentic and natural language usage, aligning with the test's objectives. Accept the fact that phrasal verbs are challenging, so just simply make peace with them. Instead of getting frustrated, try to come up with your own way to learn them more easily. Right now, I will share some of the strategies I found useful in learning phrasal verbs. And honestly, I've been using a combination of all these strategies, and the result has been great. It does not mean that I am a phrasal verb dictionary or I've mastered them all. I am a long life learner, still learning new phrasal verbs, especially from movies, and adding to my knowledge. These are simply the strategies that I came up with, and through years of teaching, I've observed that my students could remember and use the phrasal verbs more efficiently by applying one or more of these recommended ways. Strategy number 1. Stick to very common phrasal verbs, especially if you're a beginner. There is no need to memorize the phrasal verbs that are rarely used or even the ones that you cannot relate to or understand the meaning or the usage. Strategy number 2, do not memorize long lists of phrasal verbs. Memorizing these long lists won't do any good and you'll just end up more confused. Phrasal verbs are endless and it's not a race to memorize them all without being able to use them. Strategy number 3, you do not need to know all the meanings of a phrasal verb. Some phrasal verbs have more than 10 different meanings and it's hard and confusing to try to memorize them all at once. Learn theme-based phrasal verbs, which simply means the phrasal verbs used in different topics. For instance, try to learn a bunch of common phrasal verbs related to the topic of technology. For example, log on, log in, set up, back up, shut down, or learn some common phrasal verbs used in the topic of relationships. Patch up, make up, break off, go out with, drift apart. I believe this is a more practical way in which you can remember and use phrasal verbs more easily. And last but not least, watch movies. Watching movies is the best way to improve your phrasal verbs. Books don't usually tell you what the most common phrasal verbs are, and you've got to go through memorizing long lists of phrasal verbs. By watching movies constantly, you will get to know a number of phrasal verbs that keep repeating, which means that they are practical in everyday communication. Thank you for joining me today as we discuss the significance of phrasal verbs in everyday speaking and the IELTS speaking test. I hope you found this lesson helpful and you'll soon feel more confident in using phrasal verbs. See you next time.